My sister claimed I owed her money because I didn't stop her teenage pregnancy, but her custody hearing was truly enlightening. When my sister Kayla got pregnant at 17, I was 23 and working 2 jobs to pay for community college. She had been sneaking out with her boyfriend, Tony, for months, and despite my warnings that he was bad news, I tried to talk to her about protection, about waiting, and about Tony's 3 other girlfriends. But she just screamed that I wasn't her mother, and couldn't tell her what to do. When she announced the pregnancy at dinner, our parents kicked her out, and she went to live with Tony's family while I offered to help her look into adoption agencies or support programs, but she said she didn't need my fake concern. 6 months later, Tony left her for another girl, and his parents told Kayla she had to find another place to live. She showed up at my apartment with a newborn named Destiny, saying that as her big sister, I had an obligation to help, not asking but demanding, claiming that if I had been a better role model and guided her properly, she never would have gotten pregnant. So this was partially my fault, and she said I owed her for failing as a sister. I let her stay for what I thought would be a few days while she got organized, but those days turned into months of hell. Kayla expected me to watch Destiny while she went out with friends, because she claimed she was still young and deserved a life, so she would leave for entire weekends, turning off her phone, while I had to call out of work to care for her baby. When I complained, she said I should have taught her about responsibility when she was younger, so this was my chance to make up for it. She spent her child support money from Tony on clothes for herself, and then demanded I buy formula and diapers, because I had a job, and when I told her I was broke, she said I should have made sure she stayed in school so she could have a job too. She claimed I failed her by not forcing her to make better decisions. And despite fighting me every step of the way, my rent was late because I was buying baby supplies. I failed a semester because I missed classes watching Destiny, and I lost one of my jobs because of constant absences. Kayla said those were small sacrifices compared to what she had given up and that I should be grateful she let me be part of Destiny's life, actually saying I was lucky she was giving me the chance to finally be a decent sister. The breaking point was when Kayla applied for government assistance and listed me as Destiny's primary caregiver without telling me, receiving benefits for months while I was actually raising her child, using my address and income information. When I confronted her, she said I was basically Destiny's mom anyway since I did everything, so it made sense for me to be legally responsible, adding that this was my chance to have the kid I'd probably never have on my own since I was too boring to keep a man. That was when I started keeping records. Every time Kayla left Destiny with me, I wrote down dates and times, kept every receipt for baby supplies I bought, saved every text message where she said she was going out and didn't know when she'd be back, and took screenshots every time she called me mom in front of Destiny because she couldn't be bothered to correct her. I had 6 months of detailed documentation of abandonment recorded. Then Kayla made a mistake by posting online about being a struggling single mom receiving no help from anyone, trying to get sympathy and donations from strangers, claiming her family had abandoned her, and that she was raising Destiny entirely alone, while working 3 jobs. People started sending money through fundraising apps, and she gathered $2,000 with her lies, which is when I decided enough was enough and filed for emergency custody of Destiny. The court date was set, and Kayla laughed, saying no judge would give a baby to an aunt instead of the mother, so she didn't take it seriously and didn't even hire a lawyer. She just showed up in the party clothes she wore the night before, still smelling like alcohol and cigarettes, while I arrived with 6 months of evidence and my cousin Sarah, a lawyer who agreed to help after hearing how Kayla had been treating me. The judge asked Kayla basic questions about Destiny's routine, and she didn't know what formula she used, what diaper size she wore, or when her last doctor's appointment was. When asked about Destiny's favorite toy, Kayla guessed wrong, and when the judge asked where Destiny stayed during the 3 jobs Kayla claimed to have online, Kayla stuttered that I watched her sometimes. That was when Sarah presented the evidence, opening the binder with deliberate slowness, letting the pages fan out so everyone could see how thick it was. The judge leaned forward slightly as Sarah began pulling out receipts, placing them on the table in neat rows, each showing my name, my card number, my purchases of formula, diapers, wipes, and clothes in sizes that gradually increased as Destiny grew. Sarah pointed to the dates, explaining how they matched text messages where Kayla said she was going out and didn't know when she'd return. The judge picked up a receipt dated 3 months prior for a grocery store purchase at 2 in the morning because Destiny's formula had run out and I had to leave my night shift to buy more, and Sarah showed the text from that same night where Kayla said she was at a club downtown and her phone battery was dying. Kayla's face went pale as Sarah continued pulling out more evidence, stacking it higher. 6 months of documentation spread across the table like proof of a crime. The timestamps on the receipts corresponded to screenshots of social media posts, showing Kayla at parties, bars, and concerts, always smiling and carefree, while I was home changing diapers. Sarah presented the calendar I kept, with every day marked with a K for when Kayla was actually home with Destiny, or an N for when I was the one doing everything, and the pattern was obvious, showing weeks with only Ns, then maybe 1 or 2 Ks before another long period of me being the only parent. The judge studied the calendar without speaking, tracing the lines of letters with her finger, while Kayla tried to shrink in her chair, her eyes darting between the evidence and the door as if calculating if she could just leave. The judge put down the calendar and looked directly at Kayla, asking about the application for government assistance, reading the date it was filed and the information listed. Kayla's hands twisted in her lap as she stammered something about how she thought it was okay since I watched Destiny most of the time, her voice getting higher and faster as she tried to explain that she didn't understand all the paperwork and just filled out what made sense. The judge's expression didn't change, but her posture became more upright and rigid. Sarah didn't wait for Kayla to finish, pulling out another stack of papers showing the benefits Kayla had received over 5 months, with the dollar amounts highlighted in yellow, then showing my bank statements from those same months, pointing out overdraft fees and late payment fines because I was buying everything Destiny needed while Kayla pocketed the aid money meant for the child's care. The judge asked Kayla directly what she had spent the benefit money on if not for Destiny's care, and Kayla opened her mouth, but nothing came out, looking at me as if I could help her or give her the right answer, but I just sat there with my hands clasped. Into the silence, Sarah presented copies of Kayla's credit card statements, showing purchases at clothing stores, makeup counters, and bars on the same dates the benefits were deposited. The judge's jaw tightened visibly. Sarah moved on to the fundraising campaign, opening Kayla's posts on a tablet and turning it so the judge could read. The judge put on her reading glasses and scrolled through Kayla's profile, her lips pressed into a thin line, reading a post aloud in a flat, professional voice that somehow made every word sound worse, where Kayla had written about being completely alone, about her family turning their back on her, and about working 3 jobs just to support her baby. The judge looked up from the tablet and asked Kayla to name one of those 3 jobs. The courtroom went silent, and Kayla's mouth opened and closed as if trying to form words but unable to find them, saying something about babysitting sometimes and doing some online work, but she couldn't provide details when the judge pressed her. Sarah showed the judge the total from the fundraiser, $2,000 gathered with completely false claims, and the judge asked if Kayla had declared that income, and Kayla's silence was answer enough. Sarah presented screenshots of messages from people who donated, people offering prayers and support to a single mom they thought was struggling alone, and the judge's expression shifted from severe to something close to disgust. Kayla began to cry, her shoulders shaking as tears ran down her face, saying she was desperate, that she didn't know what else to do, that everything had fallen apart and she just needed help. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a second, she almost seemed genuine, but the judge waited for Kayla to finish crying before asking why she hadn't asked her family for help instead of lying to strangers online. Kayla looked at me, and something flashed across her face as she murmured something about pride and not wanting to admit she had failed. The judge asked if she understood that fraud was a crime, not just a mistake made out of desperation, and Kayla nodded, but kept her gaze down, wiping her wet cheeks with her hands. Sarah remained perfectly still, letting the moment stretch so the judge could see exactly who Kayla was beneath all the excuses. Haley, the court-appointed guardian ad litem representing Destiny's interests, stood up from her seat at the side table carrying a binder almost as thick as Sarah's, and introduced herself to the judge. The judge signaled her to proceed, and Haley opened her binder and began reading her preliminary report in a steady, objective voice, stating she had visited my apartment 3 times in the last month, observing how I interacted with Destiny, and how Destiny responded to me. She also attempted to observe Kayla with Destiny, but Kayla missed 2 scheduled visits and arrived 40 minutes late to the 3rd. Haley described how Destiny constantly called me mom, ran to me when she was upset, and showed me her toys, wanting my attention during play, noting that Destiny's attachment to me showed all the signs of a secure relationship with a primary caregiver. When Haley asked Destiny about her other mother, referring to Kayla, Destiny seemed confused, and said mom is right here, pointing to me. The judge listened, without interrupting, occasionally making notes. Haley's recommendation was clear and direct. I should receive temporary custody while a full evaluation was completed over the next few months, and Kayla should have only supervised visits until she demonstrated a consistent ability to meet Destiny's basic needs. The judge thanked Haley and set the report aside, her hand resting on it as if she had already decided. The judge announced she was granting me temporary legal custody of Destiny effective immediately, and Kayla's face crumpled as if someone had physically struck her. The judge continued, explaining that Kayla would have supervised visits twice a week, at the Family Services Center, and needed to demonstrate significant improvement in stability and judgment before any changes would be considered. Kayla tried to interrupt, almost rising from her chair, but the judge held up a hand and told her to sit down, her voice becoming firmer as she explained that this wasn't about Kayla's feelings or desires, but about what Destiny needed. Stability, consistency, and a caregiver who put her needs first. Kayla sank back into the chair, covering her face with her hands as she sobbed, but the judge didn't seem moved by the crying, simply continuing to outline the visitation schedule, the requirements Kayla needed to meet, and the timeline for future hearings. I felt something release in my chest, a tension I had carried for so long I had forgotten it was there. Destiny was safe now, legally protected, and no matter what Kayla did, she couldn't just take her back. The judge wasn't finished, ordering Kayla to repay all fraudulent government benefits within 6 months or face further legal action, and then stating she was referring the fundraising fraud to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. Kayla's head snapped up, eyes wide with new panic, and she started to say something, but the judge cut her off, saying the court had no discretion in cases of potential fraud. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table. I wanted to feel bad for Kayla. Wanted to feel guilty for what was happening to her. But mostly I just felt tired and relieved, because she had done this to herself with every choice, every lie, and every time she blamed me, instead of taking responsibility. This was the consequence she had been avoiding for nearly 2 years. Kayla looked at me from across the room, and I saw hate there now, cutting through the tears, thinking I had betrayed her and destroyed her life on purpose, not understanding that I just stopped letting her destroy mine. The hearing ended, and everyone stood as the judge left through the private door. The moment she was gone, Kayla came toward me across the room, her voice rising to a scream before she even reached my side, yelling that I had ruined everything, that I had stolen her daughter, and that I was a vengeful witch who had planned all of this. Sarah stepped between us immediately, positioning herself so Kayla had to stop or physically push her. Sarah's voice remained calm but firm as she told Kayla that this behavior was exactly why she lost custody, and that she needed to leave before making things worse for herself. The bailiff approached, hand resting on his belt in a way that made his readiness clear, while Kayla continued screaming over Sarah's shoulder, calling me names I won't repeat, and saying things about my life and choices that hurt, even though I knew they came from her pain. Other people in the courtroom were staring now, and a clerk stopped gathering papers to watch. Sarah told Kayla one more time to leave, or the bailiff would remove her. Kayla finally backed off, chest heaving, face red and blotchy from crying, pointing at me to say this wasn't over and I hadn't won anything, before turning around and pushing through the courtroom doors hard enough to slam them against the walls. I picked up Destiny from the daycare next to the courthouse where she had been playing during the hearing, and she reached for me immediately, her little arms going around my neck. The drive home took 20 minutes, and she whined in her car seat the whole way, sensing something was different even if she didn't understand what. Back at our apartment, I made her lunch while she clung to my leg, not wanting to let me out of her sight. She picked at her food, eating maybe half before pushing the plate away. I took her to the bedroom for a nap, and she fought it at first, crying and calling for mom in a way that made my heart ache. But I held her, rocked her, and sang the song she liked. And eventually, her eyes grew heavy. She fell asleep with her hand clenched in my shirt, making sure I couldn't leave without her knowing. I sat there on the floor next to the crib, watching her breathe, watching her face relax into a peaceful sleep, and the weight of what had just happened crashed down on me like something physical. I wasn't just her aunt anymore, not just helping temporarily. I was now her legal guardian, responsible for everything, every decision, every problem, every need she had was mine to handle. She was 2 years old and I was 24, and this was my life now. That night, after Destiny woke up from her nap and I gave her dinner and a bath, my phone rang with Aunt Renee's name on the screen. I answered while Destiny played with blocks on the living room floor. Renee said she heard about the hearing from my mother and said she was proud of me for standing up for Destiny when no one else would, offering to help with childcare when I had classes, saying she had flexible hours at work and could watch Destiny a couple of times a week if I needed. I thanked her, feeling tears prick my eyes at the kindness after such a hard day. But then Renee said something that made me freeze, admitting the family had known for months that Kayla was taking advantage of me. Everyone had seen it happen, seen me struggle, seen Kayla partying while I raised her baby, but no one wanted to get involved in the drama, didn't want to pick sides, and didn't want things to be awkward at family gatherings. So they just watched and stayed quiet while I drowned. Renee apologized, saying she should have spoken up sooner and offered help before it got so bad. I told her it was okay, even though it really wasn't, even though knowing they all just watched hurt almost as much as everything Kayla had done, but I needed the help now more than I needed to hold a grudge. Destiny threw a block and laughed, oblivious to the adult conversation happening over her head. I told Renee I would take the childcare offer, and we agreed she would come the following week. 2 days after the hearing, my phone rang while I was feeding Destiny lunch, the caller ID showing a county number I didn't recognize. A woman introduced herself as someone from the district attorney's office working on benefit fraud cases, saying she needed me to come in to give a formal statement about Kayla using my information without permission to apply for government assistance. I felt my stomach turn, even though she explained immediately that I wasn't in trouble, but that I was a victim of identity theft, and they needed my statement to build the case against Kayla. I scheduled an appointment for the next afternoon, and spent the rest of the day feeling nauseous, knowing my sister could face real criminal charges for what she had done. Part of me felt guilty for starting all this, even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong since Kayla had stolen from the government using my name and address to commit fraud, but I still felt like throwing up. My phone started blowing up that night with text messages from Kayla, the first ones being apologies saying she was so sorry and didn't want things to go this far, then shifting to accusations claiming I was destroying her life over a misunderstanding. She said I was being vindictive and trying to punish her for past mistakes, sending a message saying I was always jealous of her and this was my chance to ruin everything for her. I watched the messages coming one after another, my phone vibrating constantly on the coffee table while Destiny played with her blocks. Some texts begged me to call the prosecutor and say it was all a mistake, while others called me horrible names and said I was a terrible sister who never cared about family. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to Sarah, who called me within minutes telling me to stop responding completely, to document every message but not interact in any way because Kayla was spiraling and anything I said could be twisted and used against me in the ongoing custody evaluation. I silenced Kayla's number and tried to focus on getting Destiny ready for bed. The first supervised visit was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at the Family Services Center downtown. I dressed Destiny in clothes Kayla had bought her months ago, hoping it might help. We arrived 15 minutes early and checked in at the front desk, sitting in a waiting room with worn carpet and plastic chairs bolted to the floor. Destiny sat on my lap playing with a stuffed animal while we waited and waited. 20 minutes past the scheduled time, Kayla still hadn't shown up. 30 minutes, then 40 minutes. I was about to ask the receptionist what to do when Kayla finally walked through the door looking terrible. Her hair greasy and pulled into a messy bun, wearing clothes that looked like she had slept in them, smelling like she hadn't showered in days, a mix of stale cigarettes and body odor that made me want to step away from her. The supervisor, a woman who introduced herself as Nicole, took us to a small room with toys and a table. Kayla reached for Destiny immediately, but Destiny started to cry and reached for me. And I saw something break in Kayla's face, a crack in whatever armor she was wearing. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away and tried to smile at Destiny. Nicole suggested Kayla sit on the floor and let Destiny come to her when she was ready. Kayla sat down heavily and pulled out her phone while Destiny clung to my leg. Nicole sat in the corner with a clipboard taking notes, her pen moving steadily across the page every few minutes. Kayla tried to interest Destiny in toys, but didn't know which ones Destiny liked, holding up a doll that Destiny shook her head at, then offering blocks that Destiny ignored. When Destiny finally started to play, she stayed close to me, occasionally looking back to make sure I was still there. Kayla spent most of the hour scrolling through her phone screen, looking up every now and then to see what Destiny was doing, and tried to pick Destiny up once, causing Destiny to scream so loud that Nicole had to intervene. Kayla's hands were shaking when she put Destiny back on the floor. The whole visit felt wrong and sad, and I hated every minute of it. When the time was up, Destiny practically threw herself at me and buried her face in my shoulder. Kayla stood there watching us leave, arms hanging at her sides, looking more lost than I had ever seen her. Nicole called me 3 days later, asking if I could host her for a home evaluation, and she showed up at my apartment the following Tuesday with a thick folder and a tape measure. She walked through every room, opening closets, checking smoke detectors, measuring the space in Destiny's room, and asking about our daily routine, like what time Destiny woke up, what she ate for breakfast, when she napped, and what we did in the evening. She wanted to see my childcare arrangements, and I showed her the schedule I had worked out with the daycare near my job. She asked about my finances, and I pulled out my budget sheet showing exactly where every dollar went, and she looked at the receipts I kept for baby supplies and the documentation of every expense related to Destiny's care. She seemed impressed by how organized everything was despite my tiny apartment and limited income, constantly making notes in her small, neat handwriting filling page after page in her folder. Nicole asked about my plans for the future, and I felt my throat tighten as I admitted I had to drop down to part-time at community college because I couldn't afford tuition and daycare at the same time. My original plan was to finish my degree this year and start looking for better jobs, but now I was taking 1 or 2 classes a semester when I managed to fit them in between work and caring for Destiny. Nicole nodded and wrote something in her folder that took up several lines, saying that showed my commitment to putting Destiny's needs first, even if it meant sacrificing my own goals. I felt tears prick my eyes because it was true, but it also hurt to say it out loud knowing my whole life had changed, and there was no way to go back to what I had planned. Nicole spent another hour going over emergency procedures, asking about my support system, and reviewing Destiny's medical records before finally leaving, and I felt drained and exposed, like she had seen every corner of my life and found it just barely adequate. Kayla started posting on social media again a few days later. I saw the first post when a friend sent me a screenshot asking if I was okay. Kayla had written a long story about how I had manipulated the court system and stolen her baby through lies and fake evidence, saying I was always jealous of her and couldn't stand seeing her happy, alleging that I invented stories about her being a bad mother because I wanted Destiny for myself. The post had dozens of comments from people who didn't know the true story, all saying how terrible I was and how much they pitied Kayla. She posted again the next day with more accusations, each more twisted than the last, claiming I falsified documents and paid people to lie in court, and that the judge was biased because Sarah knew someone at the courthouse. She built an entire narrative where she was the innocent victim and I was some kind of villain who orchestrated everything out of spite. I watched people believe her version of events and felt helpless to do anything about it. My mother called that weekend, and I saw her name on my phone and almost didn't answer, but I picked up on the 4th ring. She said she had seen Kayla's posts and wanted to know my side of the story, then asked if I really had to take things this far instead of resolving it as a family. I felt anger rise in my chest, hot and fast, reminding her that she had kicked Kayla out when she got pregnant and had barely seen Destiny since she was born, telling her she had no right to question my decisions when she made it clear she wanted nothing to do with the situation. She stayed silent for a long moment, then changed the subject to ask how Destiny was and if I needed anything. I said we were fine and hung up as fast as I could, my hands shaking as I put the phone on the table, so tired of everyone having opinions on what I should do without offering any real help. Sarah called me that night after seeing Kayla's posts, telling me to make all my social media accounts private immediately and not to respond to any of Kayla's online accusations, explaining that anything I said publicly could be taken out of context and used against me in court. The best thing I could do was stay quiet and let the evidence speak for itself. I followed her advice, even though it hurt to see people believe Kayla's lies. I wanted to defend myself, to tell everyone the truth about what had really happened, but I kept my mouth shut, made my accounts private, and watched my sister weave her story for anyone who would listen, feeling like I was losing even though I knew I was doing the right thing. The second supervised visit happened 2 weeks later. I took Destiny to the Family Services Center expecting another awkward hour like the first time, but when we walked into the waiting room, Kayla was already there with a guy I had never seen before who had his arm around her shoulders while she laughed at something he said. When she saw us, she jumped up and pulled the guy over, introducing him as Lucas, and telling Destiny he would be her new daddy. Destiny hid behind my legs while Lucas tried to high-five her. Kayla told Nicole that Lucas was her boyfriend and she wanted him to meet Destiny during the visit. Nicole's expression hardened as she separated them, explaining that only Kayla was approved for visits, and Kayla started to argue, saying Lucas would be part of Destiny's life, so he needed to get involved now. Nicole repeated that the court order specified supervised visits for Kayla only, and if she couldn't follow that rule, the visit would be cancelled. Lucas seemed uncomfortable and said he would wait in the car. Kayla shot me a look as if that was somehow my fault before following Nicole back to the visitation room. I waited in my car while the visit finished, watching through the window, as Kayla tried to make Destiny play with blocks, while Destiny kept looking toward the door where I had exited, and Kayla's frustration was visible in the rough way she stacked the blocks. When the time was up, Nicole walked them out and gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Destiny ran to me, wrapping her arms around my legs and burying her face in my jeans. Kayla stood at the door with her arms crossed, watching us with an expression I couldn't read. I secured Destiny in her seat and drove home without looking back. Nicole called me that night after I put Destiny to bed, asking if we could talk about what she observed during the visit, and I settled onto the couch with a knot forming in my stomach. She said Kayla's behavior with the boyfriend showed concerning judgment about appropriate boundaries, especially bringing someone new around Destiny without proper introduction or approval. I agreed, remembering how uncomfortable the whole situation had been. Then Nicole asked if Kayla had a history of rushing into relationships, and I told her about Tony and how that ended, mentioning the 2 other serious boyfriends Kayla had introduced to Destiny in the last year, guys who stayed for a few weeks before disappearing. Nicole was silent for a moment, then said she would note that pattern in her evaluation, thanking me for being honest and saying she would be in touch soon. 3 days later, Sarah called with news that made my hands shake. The district attorney had filed formal charges against Kayla for benefit, fraud, and theft by deception, related to the fundraising campaign. Sarah explained that the evidence I provided was strong enough to warrant criminal prosecution, not just civil penalties. I felt sick, even though I knew this was a natural consequence of Kayla's decisions. That night, my phone rang almost at midnight, and Kayla's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her at first, saying the police had contacted her about the charges and she was going to jail, and that all of this was my fault for giving them the evidence. I let her cry for a minute before saying I hadn't filed criminal charges. The prosecutor had done that on their own. She begged me to make them drop the charges, to tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I explained as gently as I could that I didn't control what the prosecutor did, and that once they had evidence of a crime, they had to proceed. She called me a liar and hung up. The next scheduled visit came and went without Kayla showing up. I sat in the waiting room of the Family Services Center with Destiny for 20 minutes past the start time until Nicole came out and said Kayla hadn't called to cancel. Destiny asked where her other mommy was, and I didn't know what to tell her. We went home, and I tried to keep our afternoon routine normal, but I felt sad watching Destiny look toward the door every time she heard a noise. The next week's visit was the same. No Kayla, no calls, just Destiny and I sitting in that waiting room until Nicole told us we could go. She made notes on her clipboard and said this pattern of inconsistency was concerning. I asked if Kayla had given any reason for missing the visits, and Nicole said she hadn't been able to reach her. Destiny stopped asking for her other mommy after that second missed visit, which somehow made me sadder than when she asked. I was thinking about going back to school full-time, but I still needed childcare I could actually afford. The community college had a partnership with a daycare program offering reduced rates for students, so I scheduled a tour. The director showed me the toddler room where kids Destiny's age played with toys and did simple crafts, asking about Destiny's routine and needs, and I answered every question easily because I knew everything about this child's life. When she asked about allergies and medical history, I pulled out the binder I kept with all of Destiny's documents, and the director smiled, saying most parents weren't nearly that organized. I enrolled Destiny for 3 mornings a week so I could take more classes. Filling out the enrollment forms was strange when I wrote my name on the guardian line instead of checking the box for aunt or other relative. The permanence of it hit me hard, seeing my name in black and white as the person legally responsible for this child. 2 weeks later, Nicole called, asking if I could meet her at her office the next afternoon. I agreed, asking Aunt Renee to watch Destiny, and showed up nervous about what she might have found. Nicole had a thick file on her desk when I walked in and got straight to the point, saying she had done a surprise home visit to Kayla's current address the day before. I felt my stomach turn imagining what she discovered. Nicole said she found Kayla living in a 1-bedroom apartment, with her boyfriend and 2 of his roommates, the place cluttered with clothes and dishes, with nowhere for a child to sleep. When Nicole asked where Destiny would sleep if she came to visit, Kayla vaguely pointed to the couch. Nicole also noticed one of the roommates smoking inside, even though Kayla claimed the apartment was smoke-free. Kayla admitted she couldn't afford her own place anymore after paying a lawyer to help with the criminal charges. Nicole closed the file and looked directly at me, saying her evaluation would recommend that I receive full custody with Kayla having only supervised visits. I sat there processing what she had just told me, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Nicole explained that Kayla showed no significant progress in addressing the concerns that led to the temporary custody order, missed visits, made poor choices about her living situation, and demonstrated a continued inability to prioritize Destiny's needs. The recommendation would go to the judge within a week, and then a final hearing would be scheduled. I thanked Nicole for being thorough and honest, and she said she was just doing what was best for Destiny. Walking to my car, I felt the weight of knowing this was really happening. Kayla was going to lose custody permanently, and I was going to become a mother at 24 to a child I never planned to raise. Kayla must have found out about the recommendation because 3 nights later I woke up to pounding on my apartment door. I checked my phone and saw it was 11 at night. Through the peephole, I could see Kayla, face red and tear-stained, demanding to see Destiny. I called Sarah first, keeping her on the line while deciding what to do. Sarah told me not to open the door and to call the police immediately. I dialed while Kayla kept pounding and screaming that I had stolen her daughter and ruined her life. Neighbors' lights started turning on. When I told the dispatcher my sister was violating a custody order by appearing at my home, she said officers were on the way. Kayla was still pounding when I heard the sirens. I watched through the peephole as 2 police officers talked to her, and she pointed at my door while crying. They led her to their car, and I saw her get in the back seat. An officer came to my door, and I opened it with Sarah still on the phone. He said they were giving Kayla a warning about violating the custody order, and that if she returned, she would be arrested. After he left, I locked the door and checked on Destiny, who somehow slept through the whole thing. The next morning, I woke up to a long email from Kayla. The subject line said, "Please read this," and I almost deleted it, but something made me open it. She wrote that she knew she had messed everything up and that showing up at my apartment was wrong. She said she was talking to her therapist about her patterns and was starting to understand how her decisions hurt Destiny. She wanted to sign up for parenting classes and commit to regular therapy to prove she could change. The email sounded different from her usual blame and excuses, more genuine and self-aware. She asked if I would support her having more visits if she showed consistent improvement over time, saying she understood why I had custody and that Destiny deserved stability, but she wanted to be a real mother eventually. I read the email 3 times, feeling torn between hope that she might actually be changing and doubt based on all the times she made promises before. I called Sarah and read her the email over the phone. Sarah listened without interrupting, then asked what I wanted to do. I admitted I had mixed feelings about wanting to help my sister, but also needing to protect Destiny from more disappointments and instability. Sarah reminded me that Kayla had made promises before and broken them, that words were easy but actions were what mattered, saying my primary responsibility was to Destiny's well-being, not Kayla's feelings or my own guilt. We talked for nearly an hour about boundaries and realistic expectations. Sarah helped me understand that supporting Kayla's growth didn't mean changing the custody agreement until she proved real, sustained change over a long period. I felt clearer after hanging up, knowing what I needed to say. I replied to Kayla that afternoon while Destiny napped. I told her I was happy she was recognizing her patterns and would support her seeking help, that therapy and parenting classes were good steps, and I hoped she would continue with them. But I also said the custody agreement needed to stay as it was until she demonstrated real, sustained change over time, not just a few weeks of effort. I explained that Destiny needed stability and consistency, meaning I had to be cautious with any changes to our routine. I clicked send and felt good about setting the boundary clearly. Kayla's reply came within an hour, saying I was being controlling and punishing her for past mistakes instead of giving her credit for trying to change. Now she accused me of wanting to keep Destiny away from her permanently and said I was using the custody order as a weapon. Reading her words, I felt the familiar frustration of dealing with someone who still didn't understand that consequences weren't punishments. She was still focused on what she wanted instead of what Destiny needed, and that told me everything about whether she had really changed. I didn't respond right away because I wanted to see if she would actually follow through. Over the next week, photos started appearing in my email. Kayla sitting in a classroom with other parents, brochures open in front of her. Kayla in a waiting room with forms on a clipboard, screenshots of appointment confirmations for therapy sessions. Each came with a short message saying she was trying, that she wanted to prove herself. I saved everything in a folder but didn't change anything about the custody agreement or my expectations. When she asked if I had noticed her progress, I told her yes, and that I was glad she was taking those steps, but that real change meant continuing with that for months, not weeks. She got frustrated quickly, sending a message back saying she was doing everything right and I still wasn't giving her credit, expecting me to reward her immediately for showing up to a few classes, as if that erased everything she had done before. My phone rang late one Tuesday while I was making dinner with Destiny playing at my feet. A number I didn't recognize came across the line, strange and hesitant, asking how I was. It was Tony. We hadn't spoken since before I filed for custody, and hearing him now seemed strange. He asked about the custody situation, if things had been decided yet, and if he needed to get involved in any way. I told him the truth, that I had temporary custody and the final hearing was approaching, and that if he wanted visits, he could seek them through appropriate legal channels. There was a long pause before he admitted he wasn't ready to be a real father, that he was still figuring out his own life and didn't know how to take care of a kid, but he just wanted to make sure Destiny was okay, safe, and being well cared for. I assured him she was fine, healthy, happy, and had everything she needed. He thanked me and said he would continue paying child support but probably wouldn't push for visits right now. The call ended, and I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, knowing Destiny's father was basically admitting he couldn't handle the responsibility. Sarah called me the next week with news about the fraud case. The prosecutor had offered Kayla a plea deal that would keep her out of jail if she accepted returning all the fraudulent benefits she had received, completing 200 hours of community service, and being on probation for 2 years. Sarah explained this was really generous considering the charges could have resulted in prison time, and that Kayla should accept it. I asked what would happen if she didn't accept, and Sarah said they would go to trial and she would likely lose given the evidence. A few days later, Sarah confirmed Kayla had accepted the deal, signed the papers, and agreed to the repayment schedule, though Sarah mentioned Kayla complained the whole time about how unfair it was. At least that meant Destiny wouldn't have to deal with her mother in prison, which seemed like the best outcome for a bad situation. Destiny had a regular checkup scheduled with her pediatrician, routine stuff I had been dealing with since getting custody. The doctor did the usual measurements and checks, asking questions about her eating, sleep, and behavior, then mentioned something that made my stomach turn. She noticed some developmental delays in Destiny, things suggesting she might not have received consistent care in her first year. Her speech was a little behind where it should be, and some of her motor skills weren't exactly at the expected level for her age. The doctor said it wasn't anything grave but recommended early intervention evaluations to ensure we caught any problems before she got older. I scheduled the appointments right there in the office, but the whole way home I felt guilty. If I had gotten custody sooner, if I had pushed earlier, maybe Destiny wouldn't be dealing with these delays now. Sarah reminded me later that I had done everything I could legally as fast as possible, but the guilt still weighed on my chest, knowing those first months with Kayla had affected Destiny in ways that might take years to fix. The social worker's final evaluation report arrived at the court about 6 weeks after the temporary custody order. Sarah got a copy and read it with me over coffee at a shop near campus. The report recommended that I receive full legal custody, with Kayla having supervised visits twice a month. Page after page documented Kayla's pattern of instability, poor judgment in bringing boyfriends to visits, and lack of prioritizing Destiny's needs despite multiple opportunities to show improvement. The social worker had noted every missed visit, every time Kayla showed up unprepared or distracted, and every instance where she demonstrated she still didn't understand what being a mother truly required. Sarah said this report would carry significant weight with the judge and that, barring something unexpected, I should prepare for permanent custody. Reading all that documentation of my sister's failures was simultaneously validating and heartbreaking. My parents showed up at my apartment one Saturday afternoon without calling beforehand. I opened the door to find both of them standing there looking uncomfortable, my mother holding a stuffed animal for Destiny. They asked if they could come in and talk, and I let them in, though part of me wanted to slam the door in their faces. Destiny ran to show them her toys without really remembering them, but she wasn't excited about visitors anyway. We sat in my small living room, and my mother started crying before anyone said anything, apologizing for not supporting me sooner, for staying on the sidelines and letting me deal with this alone. She admitted she was ashamed of how the family situation looked to outsiders, and how it was easier to pretend nothing was happening than to get involved in the mess. She said watching me take responsibility for Destiny while she did nothing made her realize she had failed both her daughters in different ways. My father stayed quiet most of the time but finally spoke too, acknowledging that kicking Kayla out when she got pregnant probably made everything worse instead of teaching responsibility as they hoped. He said watching me raise Destiny while working and going to school showed him what real responsibility was, and that I had stepped up in ways they should have. They offered to help financially with Destiny's care from now on, contributing to daycare or medical bills or whatever I needed. My father said they would testify at the final hearing if it helped my case, telling the judge Kayla wasn't capable of providing stable care. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me was angry they only showed up now that the hard part was over, but another part was relieved to finally have some family support. I told them I would think about the financial help and let Sarah know about the offer to testify. After they left, Destiny asked if those people were coming back, and I realized she didn't even know her own grandparents. 8 weeks after starting her parenting classes, Kayla completed the program, and her therapist wrote a letter for the court file. Sarah got a copy and read it to me over the phone. The therapist said Kayla was progressing in understanding her patterns of blame and denial, beginning to recognize how her decisions affected Destiny, and taking responsibility for her actions. The letter was positive overall, acknowledging the work Kayla had done and the insights she had gained through therapy. Sarah stayed quiet for a moment after reading, then said it was good Kayla was working on herself, but 8 weeks of classes and therapy didn't outweigh 18 months of documented neglect and abandonment. The letter would go into the file and the judge would consider it, but it wouldn't change the overwhelming evidence showing Kayla's pattern of instability and poor judgment. I felt conflicted reading about my sister's progress, wanting to believe she was really changing, while knowing that wanting something didn't make it true. The conflicted feeling stayed with me for days. I kept thinking about how Kayla had actually shown up to the classes, actually gone to therapy, and actually tried to do something right for the first time. Part of me wanted to give her credit for that, to acknowledge the effort, even if it didn't change the custody situation. But every time I started to feel like maybe I was being too hard on her, I remembered something the night she disappeared without warning. The times Destiny cried for hours while I tried to figure out how to calm her because Kayla hadn't bothered to teach me her routines, the rent money I spent on diapers and formula, and the semester I failed. Sarah must have sensed my doubt because she called one night and asked how I was handling everything. I admitted I felt like the villain for not giving Kayla more credit for her recent efforts. Sarah reminded me that 8 weeks didn't erase 18 months of neglect, that Kayla was only doing the minimum now because she faced real consequences, not because something fundamental had changed inside her. She pointed out that Kayla had many opportunities to take responsibility before I filed for custody, and decided not to do so until a judge forced her. That conversation helped me remember why I fought for custody in the first place. The final custody hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, and I spent the week before preparing my testimony with Sarah. We met at her office after dropping Destiny at daycare, and she coached me on the questions I would likely face. She warned me that Kayla's public defender would try to paint me as vindictive, as someone using the custody system to punish my sister instead of doing what was best for Destiny. Sarah told me to keep calm no matter what they said, to keep my answers focused on specific examples instead of emotional accusations. We practiced for hours, Sarah playing the role of the hostile lawyer while I learned to answer without getting defensive. She taught me to redirect any attack back to the facts, to answer questions about my motivations, by talking about Destiny's needs. By the end of the week, I felt as prepared as possible, though my stomach still churned every time I thought about sitting in that courtroom and testifying against my own sister. On the morning of the final hearing, I woke up at 5 after barely sleeping. I had laid out my clothes the night before, a simple blue dress that Sarah said looked professional without being overdone. I gave Destiny breakfast and dropped her at daycare early, hugging her tight before leaving. The director told me not to worry, that they would take good care of her no matter how long the hearing took. I met Sarah outside the courthouse at 8:30, and we went over everything one more time while sitting on a bench in the hallway. She reminded me to breathe, to pause before answering questions, and to look at the judge instead of Kayla. When I spoke, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Kayla arrived 15 minutes before the hearing started with a public defender I had never seen before. She wore black pants and a simple white shirt, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked tired but composed, nothing like the mess she was at the emergency custody hearing. Her public defender was a young guy who kept checking his phone and didn't seem particularly involved in the case. Kayla looked at me once when she entered but didn't say anything, just sitting at her table and clasping her hands in front of her. I noticed her leg bouncing under the table, the same nervous habit she'd had since we were girls. Sarah squeezed my arm and told me Kayla's appearance changed nothing, that looking responsible for one morning didn't erase 18 months of documented neglect. The bailiff called for order, and Judge Sterling Sullivan entered the courtroom. She was the same judge from the emergency hearing, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and piercing eyes that seemed to see right through everyone. She settled into her chair and opened the file in front of her, taking a moment to review before looking at the two tables. Judge Sullivan began by summarizing where we were in the process, noting that temporary custody had been granted to me 4 months ago with supervised visits for Kayla, stating today's hearing would determine permanent custody arrangements based on evidence and testimony presented. My stomach tied in a knot. Judge Sullivan picked up Nicole's evaluation report and spent several minutes reading it in silence, then looked directly at Kayla and asked what had changed since the temporary custody order was issued. Kayla stood up when her public defender nudged her and began talking about the parenting classes she had completed, mentioning going to therapy every week and saying she was learning to take responsibility for her decisions. The judge listened without expression, then asked Kayla to tell her about Destiny's current routine. Kayla hesitated and said Destiny probably woke up around 7 or 8 and liked cereal for breakfast. The judge asked what kind of cereal, and Kayla guessed Cheerios. Sarah made a note on her legal pad. The judge asked what diaper size Destiny wore now, and Kayla said she thought maybe size 4 or 5. Wrong again. Destiny had been in size 6 for 2 months. The judge asked when Destiny's last doctor's appointment was, and Kayla said she wasn't sure. Maybe a few weeks ago. It had been 3 days ago for her regular checkup, and I had sent Kayla the appointment reminder just like I always did. The judge's expression didn't change, but she made several notes before continuing. Haley, the guardian ad litem representing Destiny's interests throughout the process, took the stand next and explained she had observed multiple visits between Kayla and Destiny in addition to spending extensive time evaluating my home and care. Haley said Destiny showed a secure attachment to me, was reaching all her developmental milestones, and that my home provided a stable and nurturing environment. Then Haley described Destiny's behavior during visits with Kayla, how Destiny cried when I left and spent most of the visits asking when I would come back, saying Destiny seemed confused by Kayla's presence, and didn't show the same level of comfort she exhibited with me. Haley recommended continuing the current custody agreement with potential for increased visits if Kayla maintained consistent progress over the next 6 months, emphasizing that Destiny's need for stability had to be the priority, especially given her young age and the disruption she had already experienced. Kayla's public defender tried to argue that anxiety was normal for any child in that situation, but Haley calmly explained that Destiny's reactions went beyond the normal range and indicated an insecure attachment to her biological mother. The judge asked for a brief recess before the next witness, and I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. Sarah followed me and said everything was going well, that Haley's testimony was exactly what we needed. I asked if Kayla's public defender could somehow turn things around, and Sarah said no, the evidence was too overwhelming. We returned to the courtroom, and Kayla's therapist appeared on the video screen for remote testimony. The therapist was a middle-aged woman, with kind eyes, who spoke carefully about confidentiality, but still provided relevant information, confirming Kayla had been attending weekly therapy sessions for the last 2 months, and was working on responsibility and acknowledging her patterns of blame and denial. The therapist said Kayla was making progress in understanding how her decisions affected Destiny, and was beginning to take genuine responsibility for her actions. Then the judge asked if the therapist could recommend unsupervised visits at this time. The therapist paused before answering, then said that although Kayla was doing important work in therapy, real change took sustained time and effort, explaining that 2 months of therapy couldn't undo years of established patterns, and that Destiny's young age and need for stability meant any change in the custody agreement should happen very gradually. The therapist said she couldn't recommend unsupervised visits at this time, though she hoped Kayla would continue her therapeutic work regardless of the custody outcome. Kayla looked at her hands while the therapist spoke, her shoulders hunched forward. Sarah presented her evidence next, methodically guiding the judge through documentation of my stable housing, steady employment, and established childcare arrangements. She showed records of every medical appointment I took Destiny to, every developmental evaluation, every vaccination. Sarah presented my pay stubs and bank statements showing how I had budgeted to provide everything Destiny needed despite my limited income. She spoke about the early intervention services I arranged when Destiny's pediatrician noticed some developmental delays, and how Destiny was already showing improvement with consistent support. Sarah emphasized that I had sacrificed my education and career plans to give Destiny the stability she deserved, reducing to part-time classes and working around daycare schedules. She showed the court my revised degree plan that would take 3 more years instead of 1, proof that I was committed to raising Destiny long-term. Sarah's presentation was complete and organized, every piece of evidence building on the last to show the full picture of the life I built for Destiny. Kayla's public defender stood for his closing arguments, and I braced myself. He spoke about how Kayla was only 19, barely more than a child herself when she became a mother, saying she made mistakes but every young parent makes mistakes and she deserved a chance to be a real mother with the right support and structure. He pointed to the completion of parenting classes and her consistent attendance at therapy as proof of her commitment to change, arguing that the court should consider a gradual reunification plan, allowing Kayla to rebuild her relationship with Destiny over time, starting with increased visits and working toward shared custody. He said taking a child from a mother permanently was a drastic step that should only happen in cases of severe abuse or neglect, and that Kayla's situation was more about being young and overwhelmed than being incapable. The public defender spoke passionately, but I could tell he was working with limited information, that he didn't really know Kayla, or understand the full extent of what had happened. Sarah was already preparing her response. The judge called me to testify, and I walked to the stand with shaking legs. Sarah started with basic questions about when Kayla moved in with me and how the living situation evolved. I described the first weeks when I thought Kayla just needed temporary help, then how it became clear she had no intention of actually caring for Destiny. I went through my documentation explaining how I started keeping records after Kayla listed me as Destiny's primary caregiver without permission. Sarah asked me to describe a typical week during the time Kayla lived with me, and I detailed the nights Kayla disappeared, the mornings I woke up to find Destiny alone in her crib crying while Kayla was passed out or not even home, so I was the only one caring for Destiny. Sarah asked about the financial impact, and I explained how I went into debt buying formula and diapers while Kayla spent her child support money on herself. I kept my voice steady and stuck to the facts as Sarah taught me, avoiding emotional accusations even though my throat was tight with anger. Then Sarah asked the hardest question: if I ever wanted to be Destiny's mother. I paused before answering honestly, saying no. I never planned to have a child so young and never wanted to take Kayla's place, but said Destiny deserved consistency and safety more than Kayla deserved second chances, and I took responsibility because someone had to. I admitted I loved Destiny completely now, but that didn't erase the sacrifices I made or the childhood Destiny lost waiting for her mother to grow up. Kayla was crying at her table, but I kept looking at the judge as Sarah told me. Kayla's public defender cross-examined me briefly, asking if I ever tried to help Kayla instead of just documenting her failures. I explained I offered help repeatedly, giving Kayla a place to live and watching Destiny while she should have been looking for a job or going to appointments. He asked if I believed Kayla loved Destiny, and I said yes, I believed she loved her, but love wasn't enough when a child needed consistent care and stability. He tried a few more questions but couldn't shake my testimony because everything I said was documented and true. I stepped down and went back to my seat next to Sarah, my hands still trembling. Then Kayla took the stand and surprised me. Instead of starting her usual blame game, she admitted she wasn't ready to be a mother. She said she made terrible choices and put her own desires ahead of Destiny's needs. Kayla spoke about being 17 and scared when she got pregnant, about how Tony leaving broke something in her. She cried while saying she loved Destiny but understood why I had to step in, that Destiny deserved better than what she was providing. Kayla said she was working on herself in therapy and taking the parenting classes seriously because she hoped to be a real mother someday, even if that meant starting with supervised visits and earning back trust slowly. She looked at me when she said she was so sorry for everything she put me through, for blaming me for her own mistakes. Her public defender asked if she wanted to be part of Destiny's life, and Kayla said yes, but she knew it had to be on the terms that were best for Destiny, not what was easiest for her. I didn't know what to make of this version of my sister, this person who was finally taking responsibility. Part of me wanted to believe she had really changed, but most of me remembered all the other times she said the right things before going straight back to her old patterns. Judge Sullivan asked for a recess to review all evidence and testimony. Sarah and I went out into the hallway, and I sat on the bench trying not to vomit from anxiety. Everything seemed unreal, like I was watching this happen to someone else. Sarah kept assuring me the evidence was overwhelming, that the judge had seen everything she needed to see. Then Renee showed up with coffee from the shop down the street, sitting next to me and putting her arm around my shoulders, reminding me that whatever happened, I had done right by Destiny. She said I fought for my niece when everyone else had walked away, and that required courage. We sat there for 20 minutes while the judge reviewed the case, and I watched other families moving through the courthouse with their own dramas and crises. Everyone there had a story, everyone fighting for something. The bailiff called us back, and we returned to the courtroom. Judge Sullivan looked at the 2 tables before speaking, her expression serious. She said she reviewed all evidence, testimony, and evaluation reports carefully. The judge noted that Kayla had made some recent efforts to improve, but that 2 months of classes and therapy couldn't outweigh 18 months of documented neglect and abandonment. She spoke about Destiny's need for stability and consistent care, especially given her young age and developmental needs. Then Judge Sullivan handed down her ruling, granting me full legal and physical custody of Destiny. She said Kayla would have supervised visits twice a month at the Family Services Center, with the possibility of increased visits if she maintained consistent progress over the next 6 months. The judge emphasized that this agreement prioritized Destiny's well-being, while still allowing Kayla to maintain a relationship with her daughter if she continued working on herself. Kayla was crying but nodding, not arguing or making a scene. I felt Sarah squeeze my hand and heard Renee release a breath beside me. The judge added conditions to Kayla's visits, requiring her to continue therapy and complete follow-up parent education, saying the case would be reviewed in 6 months to assess if any modifications would be appropriate. Then she finished. I had full custody of Destiny. The judge went on to say Kayla needed to finish her probation requirements and continue going to therapy. She had to show up for every visit with Destiny for 6 months straight and prove her life was stable before she could ask for more time. Kayla nodded while tears ran down her face. She didn't look angry at me like usual, just sad and defeated, like she finally understood what she had lost. Sarah packed up her papers, and I sat there feeling strange. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. The bailiff said we could go, and everyone started moving toward the doors. I grabbed my purse and walked out into the hallway where the fluorescent lights were too bright. Aunt Renee hugged me and said she was proud. Sarah squeezed my shoulder and said she would call me later about the paperwork. Then Kayla came toward me, mascara running, looking smaller somehow, like the fight had gone out of her. She said she was sorry for everything she put me through and that Destiny was lucky to have me. Her voice cracked when she asked if we could still be sisters, even though she lost custody. I told her I hoped so. But rebuilding trust takes time. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and left with her public defender. I picked up Destiny at the daycare where she had been during the hearing. She ran to me screaming "Mommy," and wrapped her arms around my legs. I secured her in her seat and drove home through afternoon traffic. When we got to my apartment, I took her inside and sat her down. She went straight to the toy box like always. I stood in the kitchen watching her play on the living room floor, and the permanence of everything hit me hard in that moment. I was her legal mother now, not just her temporary guardian. I was 24, single, working part-time at a grocery store, and now solely responsible for raising a toddler. I loved her more than anything, but I never planned to be a mother at this age. 3 days later, Sarah came over with a stack of forms. She helped me apply for child support from Tony since I was now Destiny's legal guardian. We also went through the application for benefits I was entitled to now. The financial support would help with rent, groceries, and daycare costs, but the money didn't change the fact that my entire life had gone in a completely different direction from what I imagined when I was 18 and planning my future. The next week I met with my academic advisor at the community college. Her office was small, with motivational posters on the walls. I explained my situation, and she pulled up my record on the computer. We worked out a plan for me to take online classes at night after Destiny went to bed. Instead of graduating in 1 more year as I planned, it would take 3 years. It felt like both a loss and something I could actually do. She printed the new course schedule and wished me luck. 2 weeks after the custody decision, Kayla had her first supervised visit at the Family Services Center. I brought Destiny exactly at 2 p.m. as the schedule said. The supervisor was a woman named Miss Chen, who had a clipboard and a kind smile. Kayla was already there waiting in the visitation room. She sat on the floor with Destiny immediately and started playing with blocks, reading books, and doing puzzles with her instead of being on her phone. For the entire hour, she actually paid attention and acted like a mother. When I picked up Destiny, Miss Chen said the visit went well and noted the improvement in her report. I felt cautiously hopeful that maybe Kayla was starting to understand what being a mother really meant. My parents started coming around more after that. My mother brought groceries, and my father fixed things in my apartment that were broken. They played with Destiny and babysat so I could do homework or run errands. One night my mother was washing dishes in my kitchen and said she saw a lot of herself in Kayla's immaturity, saying she wished she had handled the pregnancy differently, instead of kicking Kayla out. We started having more honest conversations about our family and the patterns we all fell into. It didn't fix everything, but it felt like a start. A month later, I joined a support group for kinship caregivers that met every Thursday night in a church basement. There were about 12 people there, raising their grandchildren, nieces or nephews, sharing stories about dealing with courts, managing visits with biological parents, and struggling with money. Hearing their experiences made me feel less alone. A woman named Patricia was raising her 3 grandkids and working 2 jobs, and another guy named James had custody of his sister's twin daughters. Everyone there understood that family was complicated and messy. They reminded me that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. 3 months after the final custody decision, Destiny started calling me mom all the time, barely asking for Kayla between visits. I felt guilty about that, though the therapist I started seeing said it was normal for young children to attach to their primary caregiver. I made sure to show Destiny photos of Kayla on my phone and talk about her in positive ways, saying things like, "Your other mommy loves you very much and is working hard to be the best mom she can be." Destiny would look at the photos and say, "Okay," and then go back to playing. 4 months after everything, Kayla's therapist sent a progress report to the court saying she was doing well. Kayla had gone to every supervised visit without missing one, finished all her probation requirements, paid back part of the money she owed, got a job at a store in the mall folding clothes and working the register, moved into her own studio apartment, and sent me photos of it. The apartment was small but clean with a bed, a table, and a TV. She sent me a message asking if I was proud of her. I replied saying I was proud of her efforts and hoped she would continue building a stable life. Then added that custody wouldn't change anytime soon, because I needed to know I wasn't going to change everything just because she was doing better for a few months. Her response came quickly, saying she understood and had to prove herself over time. She wrote that Destiny's well-being came first and she understood that now. Reading those words from Kayla was strange. She had never spoken like that before. Maybe therapy really was working. Maybe she was starting to see things clearly, instead of through the filter of guilt and excuses she used for years. I wanted to believe, but I also knew people could say the right things without feeling them. Time would tell if this was real change or just another performance. 2 weeks later, I received a call from the Family Services Center. Tony had contacted them to schedule visits with Destiny. The supervisor said he had completed the necessary background check and parenting class and wanted to start his visits twice a month. I felt weird about it since Tony had barely been around since Destiny was born, sending child support because the court forced him but never asking to see her before. Now suddenly he wanted to be a father. The supervisor scheduled his first visit for the following Saturday at 10 in the morning. I took Destiny to the center, and Tony was already there in the visitation room looking nervous, hands not stopping moving, looking like he couldn't find where to stand. When Destiny saw him, she hid behind my legs. She didn't remember him. The supervisor kindly encouraged her to go play, and Tony sat on the floor with some blocks, trying to build a tower but kept knocking it down. Destiny watched him for a minute, then walked slowly and handed him a block. Something in my chest loosened watching them. Tony wasn't good at this. He was clumsy and unsure and clearly had no idea what he was doing, but he was trying. He read her a book doing all the wrong voices, and she laughed. He pushed her on the little indoor swing, and she screamed with joy. By the end of the hour, they were playing hide and seek, and Destiny was calling him Daddy, even though she probably didn't understand what that meant. The supervisor noted the visit went well. Tony asked when he could come back and scheduled his next visit for 2 weeks later. Driving home with Destiny asleep in her seat, I thought about how confusing this whole situation was. Kayla was trying to fix her life. Tony was finally stepping up. My parents were involved again, and even with all the pain, dysfunction, and legal battles, Destiny had people who cared about her. That had to be worth something. 6 months passed. Kayla continued going to therapy and showing up for her visits. Tony came every 2 weeks like clockwork. My parents helped watch the baby and brought groceries. Renee checked in regularly to see how we were. Slowly, something that almost looked like normal began to form. Then came Destiny's 3rd birthday. I spent a week planning a small party at my apartment, buying decorations and ordering a cake with a unicorn because Destiny was obsessed with unicorns lately. I invited Kayla, Tony, my parents, and Renee. Part of me expected someone to cancel, start drama, or ruin everything like usual, but the day came and everyone showed up. Kayla arrived first with a wrapped gift and a nervous smile. She had bought Destiny a stuffed unicorn that was almost as big as Destiny herself. Destiny hugged it immediately and dragged it around the apartment. Tony came next with a card and some books. My parents brought more food than we could eat. Renee fixed the decorations while I finished getting everything ready. For a few hours we almost felt like a normal family. Kayla helped serve the cake without complaining. Tony played with Destiny and the other kids from the building I invited, and my parents took photos and laughed at Destiny's excitement with every gift. Nobody fought. Nobody mentioned the custody battle, the court, or any part of the painful history between us. We just celebrated a little girl turning 3. When it was time for the cake, everyone gathered around. Destiny climbed onto a chair to reach the candles, her face already stained with frosting from stealing a few tastes earlier. I lit the 3 candles, and we all sang happy birthday. Watching her blow them out with everyone clapping, I felt something shift inside me. My 20s should be different. I should be finishing college, starting a career, maybe traveling or dating or doing all the things people do at 20-something. Instead, I was raising a little girl alone in a tiny apartment, while working part-time and taking online classes. I had lost the life I planned. But looking at Destiny's joy as she clapped and laughed, surrounded by people who loved her, I knew I had made the right decision. She was happy, healthy, and safe. She would grow up knowing she was wanted, and that she was fought for. That was worth every sacrifice. Life didn't turn out how I expected, but I wouldn't change that, not when it meant protecting her. Not when it meant she could have moments like this, with frosting on her face in a room full of people who cared.